Hi, I'm John Ficarra. Welcome to Ficarra Classic. I'm here with the amazing mechanic, Matt. Say hi, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
There you go. Today we're here at the garage at Wingnut Manor, and we're going to give you an update on some of the projects we've been working on over the past few months. And anything else, Matt?
Can we look at 914?
Always with the 914. All right, let's get started. Here we go. We're going to take a look at the 928s and then work our way through the garage and find out, Matt. We're going to look at the 928s and see how they're progressing. Matt. Okay, Matt. Matt likes the 914, so I guess this video is going to be on the 914. We'll get back to the 928s in the next video, but we want to show you what we're working on right now, getting ready for Luftgekühlt in about a week, is this beautiful Porsche 914 GTU IMSA car. Now, what the heck does that all mean? They'll give you a little background. Now, I'm going to do a longer version of a 914 history at the end of this video, but I don't want to clog up the beginning with too much specific history of the 914. But the 914 was a collaboration between Porsche and Volkswagen to come up for a replacement for the Ghia from Volkswagen and for the 912 for Porsche. So the Volkswagen engined car was called the 914-4, and the Porsche engined car was called the 914-6. This is a 914-6, and it was built from the factory with a 6-cylinder engine in the back from the 911T. It's a 2-liter engine, and this particular car, which we'll get into the history of that now because that's more appropriate. This particular car was brought to California brand new in 1970 as a factory 917-6. And then it was taken quite quickly and put a GT kit was put on it. Now, the GT kit was supplied by the factory. They built a few factory GTs to homologate them for racing because this is Porsche and that's what they do. They go racing. But you could buy the GT kit and put it on later, which is what this owner did. And that included wider metal flares, bigger, wider wheels and tires, roll bars, all kinds of trick stuff. Fiberglass hood, which this one still has on it. And he took that racing. He did the 12 hours of Sebring in this car back in the day. Then it moved to another owner who took it IMSA racing. And they did tracks at Laguna Seca, Riverside, Daytona. Then it sat for a little bit again. And a couple of brothers in Santa Cruz purchased it, brought it up, and they decided they're going to become race car drivers. So they took a couple of race car courses, and they started driving this, and then they painted it in this livery, this bright yellow, in early 1981. So the car sat for a little while again after they were finished with it, as race cars do. Race cars have a tendency to have explosive lives, then kind of people lose interest and they sit for a while and somebody else has fun with it. The current owner is Tom Pervasi from the Porsche Works reunion. You might have met him and his wonderful wife, Sandy. And they were doing like time trials and autocrosses with the car when they got it. Didn't even have a windshield on it, but it looked very different than this. And he decided, I want to put it back to the way it looked back in the day. He had it painted, the windshield put back on and corrected cosmetically. And he wants to now go historic racing with it. So mechanically, it was not ready. So he brought it to us, and one of the things we do is correct and refresh cars. We are going through the car front to back mechanically to make sure that it is ready for racing. And racing, even in the historic racing classes, a lot of people think it's kind of the parade laps, but it's not. These guys are really driving. So we don't want anything to mechanically go wrong on this car for Tom's safety, but also for the safety of the other drivers on the track and their cars. If this thing's next to a $2 million 935, you don't want the wheel popping off and smashing the guy's windshield. He's not going to be too happy. So we started at the front, we worked at the back and got this thing going. So let's start at the front and see what we've done so far to it. Like I said, this is a GT car, so it has a fiberglass hood. All that is just beautiful fiberglass. As you can see, this is not stock underneath. This was the fuel tank and ran with for years. It originally had a dry brake on it so you could fill through the hood. We took that off. We're historic racing. There's no need for that speed. This is a lot easier to deal with. And we had the tank rebuilt. We had a new bladder made for it by Pyrotect. And so it's all FIA approved and ready and modernized. Then in the front here, this is where the oil cooler is, because Porsches, everybody says air-cooled Porsches, but honestly, Porsches are oil-cooled. Stock, this thing had 9 liters of oil. Now I think we're pushing like 12 or 13 liters of oil that pump through it. There's an oil cooler in the front, and you wouldn't be amazed what was in here, what Tom and these guys were racing with. This was their oil cooler shield. This is a boxed in pieces of aluminum now with sides. All I had in there was this Home Depot sheet of galvanized metal, just kind of curved around it, pushing air through holes at the bottom of the car. I mean, no, just no, okay? So we rebuilt that, boxed it in, cleaned it all up. Here's a little something we do. You always want to find where the original VIN numbers are. And I always scrape them back so we can see the colors of the car before, and I leave a little bit of it before I clear coat it. So originally this car was blood orange, that's the original color there. Then it was a dark blue, then a light blue, and now of course it's this yellow. But that gives you a nice little history of the car just there in paint. So finished underneath, fuel tank is ready to go, fuel pump's rebuilt, everything's good, looking good. We start moving back. Now, one thing we found in the car, right behind the fuel tank, they had placed an electrical panel. And not with fuses or relays or anything, just 2 electric panels coming and joining right behind the fuel tank. Now, there was no reason for it to be there other than like maybe make a huge explosion. So we removed that out of the fiery bits and moved them inside and rebuilt a completely new fuse panel and put fuses in and relays in. So mechanic Matt made this gorgeous 2-panel display. It's rubber isolated from the car for vibration. You'll see 2 ignition boxes, and that's because this car has a twin spark engine, which I'll show you in a little bit and what that's all about. We also put a smaller battery in here. This had a big lead acid battery in the back. Nowadays, the lithium batteries are so much nice and tidier. Put that here, centralize the mass inside the car. We also rebuilt the dashboard. Let me show you what the dashboard was made out of. So the dashboard is now a nice wrinkle black aluminum dashboard, pretty straightforward. This is what it was before. This is literally like a thick piece of masonite, which is essentially glorified cardboard. That was the dashboard originally. That's gone. We put in a quick release steering wheel because none of us are getting any younger, and it makes it a whole lot easier to get in and out of the car. We got a new modern racing seat. Now this roll cage is the roll cage that's been in it for years. It is an antique. I don't like it. It might be the next step is pulling this roll cage out and building a new roll cage for it. But we'll get to that. We'll cross that bridge when we have to cross it. But we'll see if it passes tech inspection as is. But this is not where you want to cheap out on a race car, is the roll cage. So we'll be addressing that with the tech inspectors when we get to historic racing. So now let's go and look at really the heart of the car and what we've done to it. We took out the motor that was in it. Now, what was in it was a 3.5 liter RSR high butterfly Porsche flat 6, and it's a beast of an engine. The problem is it doesn't work in this class of car. This car is a GTU car, and for those of you who don't know, GTU stands for GT under 2.5 liters and under. GTO stands for over GTO, so that's over 2.5 liters. So GTO cars are like Mustangs and things like that. GTU cars are 2.5 liter Porsches, and they dominated the GTU class back in the day. So a correct 2.5 liter engine was found, rebuilt, and it was rebuilt with twin spark heads. So here's what I was talking about. Twin spark means there are 2 spark plugs for each cylinder. Now these obviously runs on race fuel, runs at really high compression. That explosion from those 2 spark plugs is going to cause greater power, smoother burn, better use of the fuel. The twin spark is a great and expensive, a very expensive option, but really necessary in these early race cars. This engine is kind of very close to what a Carrera 6 motor would be. Now here's something fun. If you look at the distributor, there's 12 wires coming off of the distributor. And if you looked under the hood real quick, you'd be like, is that a V12 under there? It's like, no, sir, that is a twin spark. So there's 2 wires for each cylinder coming around. Then we've got some beautiful big Webers on here, which will make a delightful sound coming through the K&N filters. These gorgeous headers, which we may or may not be using depending on how the length fits out the back of the car. We do have another set of headers that came on the old engine. We'll be fitting those. And then the transmission, we're going to be fitting a clutch roof soon. Really what we're waiting for now is an answer to the clutch. We have 1 week before Luftgekühlt, and the clutch doesn't fit. So Patrick Motorsports is helping us out with that to get a correct clutch. We'll make sure that fits perfectly. The transmission, if you'll see, now this is orientated the way it is in the car. This is a mid-engined car. So a 911 is a rear-engine car. This would be spun around the other direction. The engine's hanging out the back behind the axle. In a mid-engine car, the engine is in front of the rear axle. It's mid. And then that makes the transmission have to hang out the back. So it bolts up to the chassis here. These bolt together, then there's engine mounts in the front. And this transmission is a combination of an early 901, 915, and some 914 parts. It's a little bit of a mashup, but it works great for this application. We'll get these together, ram them in the back, and then we'll have a motor. Now, not sure what the horsepower rating is on this motor. We're gonna have to dyno it on the car and find out, but it's going to be a few hundred horsepower, and that'll be just right for a car that's definitely going to weigh under 2,000 pounds. We'll weigh it too. I'll show you that in another video. So once this gets in, the other bits that we've worked on, we got the drivetrain, the electrical, the fuel. The suspension was original to the car. These shocks here, these Koni adjustable shocks, aren't made anymore. There's a great company in Sonoma that rebuilds them and then repaints them, puts the stickers on them, makes them look brand new. And we'll be running those. And these are the original springs, front and rear, so I'm not changing the rate of the springs. We don't have any setup sheets. And what a setup sheet is, it's kind of like the doctor's list of the car. It tells you what the spring rates are and how you set the shocks and things like that, depending on what tires you're using or what track you're at. So we're gonna have to kind of start from scratch, building a history for this car and an engineering and mechanical history for it. So it'll be kind of exciting taking it to the track the first time and figuring out all the shocks and the brakes and everything else. Speaking of brakes, we had to redo the brakes. Now, this car had some really cool vintage brakes on it. Actually, I'll show you the front because the front wheel's unbolted. The front wheel, well, let me show you the wheels real quick because the wheels are kind of fun. This is a BBS wheel. It's a 3-piece wheel. And you might hear that phrase. What a 3-piece wheel is made of 3 different elements. First element is the center section here. And then there are 2 sides to the rim itself. It's split down the middle where it bolts to the center. So in order to make a wider wheel, all you have to do is take this off and put a wider section on this side or wider section on that side. You can create the offset depending on where you put the wider side, and you can make any size wheel you want. This is right now is set up for a 10-inch or 11-inch tire in the front and a 13-inch tire in the back. What we had to do is, especially on a vintage car, these sensors are pretty old. So we had them all stripped down and crack checked. And what that does is they put a chemical on the metal itself, and then it shows under certain light and temperatures cracks in it. And if these have a crack in it, we just toss it away. But it prevents you from going out on the track and this center just snapping out. You'll see it at vintage races once in a while, these wheels cracking right through the middle. So we had them all crack checked, powder coated, reassembled. These are ready for tires, which we'll be getting next week, which are gonna look really cool. Now, up front, we had to go to a new brake system, and the brakes aren't done. I'm gonna show you the brakes in a second, but this is the new front rotor. What I wanted to show you in here, here's the sway bar for the 914, which is very similar to a 911, and it goes through the center of the car, a torsion bar right there. Now, these create a lot of force as the engine, as the suspension is moving. All of this was torn out, like it literally had ripped the steel all the way around here. So we put these reinforcing plates, you can barely see the edge of it there. It goes up around that area and reinforces all the steel, so we'll be good in future. We won't have to worry about any torn sheet metal. We actually found a ton of torn sheet metal in the car. We've welded it all up because these little cars were never designed to have this kind of suspension and these size tires. Like, you think about it, those tires are sticking to the ground. What's going to give is the car itself in the corners. And we had a huge tear in here, right through the floor pan. That was torn about, I don't know, at least 8 inches right through here, where it just ripped the car in half. That means that somebody, let's say Tom was driving the heck out of it when he was autocrossing or time trialing and just torsioned the body. Because these are Targa top cars. All 914s were Targas, except for, people are going to argue there was a couple of prototypes with hard tops, and you're right, but they were all Targas, which even have a tendency to rotate more. Hopefully the cage takes care of that, but this unibody took a beating, and we've reinforced it in a few places. Now, let me finish with the brakes. These are so beautiful. I love beautiful machine parts. Here are the original calipers. These are AP racing calipers from back in the day. Now, this was some state-of-the-art stuff. These are 4-pot calipers and 1 piece of aluminum. This would have been the bomb back in the 70s and 80s. Problem is that they are ancient, and to rebuild them probably isn't the greatest idea. You just cannot get, it's very porous, and over the years this aluminum degrades. Now, I would rebuild these if this was a museum car. If we were just going to drive in and out of a museum, sure, put on the vintage correct brakes, but not going to put Tom at risk driving on these things. So we went for another period vintage option, and these are Porsche 930 brakes, or the turbo brakes, but not 930 turbo. So that's just one of my geek things. The 930 was the designation for the turbo 911. So if you say a 930 turbo, you're being redundant. Just geeky, sorry. But these were tremendous brakes back in the day. And they were originally designed off of the brakes from the 917 race car. And you could get them on your street car. But you can just look at the machining on that. Just, oh, beautiful. Paget orange pads in there. Those are going to stop like monsters. And almost the same size front and rear. Here are the rear rotors. Ugh, and you can see the size of those beasts. Now, a big, wide rotor, the size, the mass of the rotor is important. Of course, unsprung weight is up a little bit, but they have the ability to dissipate heat a lot better than a small, tiny, or solid rotor. So we got ventilator rotors there. This is our clutch work right there. So we've got brakes done, we've got the suspension done, we've got the engine ready to go in, we've got the electrical ready to go. So theoretically, next week, all of this should come together and become a whole car that we can drive triumphantly into Luftgekühlt. So stay tuned, and we'll update you and let you know if we pulled it off with the amazing 914 IMSA car. Now, we're going to go right now to the studio, and I'm going to give you a few minutes of history on the Porsche 914. Okay, let's talk quickly about the Porsche 914. It was created between Porsche and Volkswagen as a joint project. For Porsche, they'd be replacing their low-end car, the 912, which was the 4-cylinder 911. And for Volkswagen, they'd be replacing the Karmann Ghia. And so this is the late 60s, and by 1968, they had a prototype. Ferdinand Piëch was the head of the design team, which is pretty cool if you look up what he's done for Porsche racing. And by 1969, they were for sale. So there were 2 different ones. There was a 914 4-cylinder. That was the Volkswagen contribution. And there was a 914 6, which the Porsche had a Porsche 2-liter engine in it out of the 911T, detuned a little bit so it wouldn't compete too much with the 911T. So you had one engine from each company. In the United States, they were all labeled Porsche. So you're not going to see a Volkswagen 914 in the US. So the 914 was actually a huge sales success. It sold tremendously in the United States. And I think overall the 4-cylinders sold, I think, 115,000 examples. That was way in excess to what they ever sold in 911s at the time. They built them from 69 to 1976. Now, the 914-6, the Porsche engine car, wasn't as much of a hit. Now, what had happened was the making of the body got to be a little more expensive than they thought. So the 911T, which was their bottom end car of the 911 range,
was just a little more expensive than a 914-6. So the 914-6 wasn't this kind of low-end car they were hoping to, like, entry-level car. So they only sold about 3,300 of those cars over from 1969 to 1972 when they just cut production of it. There were some variants of the 914 which were kind of exciting, and one of them was the 914-8. And they only built like 2 prototypes of this. It was supposed to be a gift for the 60th birthday of Ferry Porsche. And what they did is took a 914 and put the 8-cylinder, the flat 8, out of the 908 race car in the back of it. So the 914-6 made about 110 horsepower. That flat 8 made about 300 horsepower. So you can imagine a 914 with 300 horsepower. From what I've heard, wasn't his favorite car. I believe it's in the Porsche Museum now. The next cars were the 914 GTs. And what that meant was they were trying to homologate it for racing. And so they had fender flares, and they had wider wheels, and they had roll bars and all kinds of stuff. And they did. They homologated them for racing. And they could offer a kit at the dealer where you could make your own 914 into a GT using the pieces. They didn't come with the factory GT engine, which was pretty sweet. It was a twin spark engine. But you could make yourself a GT, and a lot of these cars that you'll see that have the GT flares are the dealer made or after the fact. One fun one that I like is the Porsche Tapiro. And now this wedge car was based on a 914-6, and it was just a show car, just a concept car, but there's only one of them. I love wedge cars, and I think this is one of the cooler ones ever made. I think it had some kind of horrible fiery death, and it's in a museum now, unrestored. I think it's still half burnt. The car that could have happened, the most likely of these that could have happened, was the 916. They built 11 prototypes of it, and what that was going to be the kind of next step after the 914-6, and it would have had the larger engine in it. The 914-6s only had the 2 liters for the whole run. So what they were trying to do was maybe put the 2.4 liter, the bigger engine that the 911 had in it, in the 914. And then they also, all 914s are target topped. And the 916 was going to have a hard top and a bigger engine in the back, 2.4, or maybe even the 2.7 out of the Carrera. So that would have made it a competitor for the Ferrari Dino, which was the entry-level Ferrari at the time. And also, like, it was always called the poor man's Ferrari, and the 914 was always called the poor man's Porsche. When I was growing up, it was like, oh, you've got the poor man's Porsche. How nice of you. That's got a Volkswagen in it. It's like, oh, no. Anyway, the 916 never happened. There's a few examples that actually run and drive, but none of them were actually manufactured in production. Finally, in production, there were 2 limited edition ones made in 1974, the Creamsicle and the Bumblebee. And you can see by these pictures why they're called that. You had the cream-colored one, and you had one was black and yellow. They were really cool. You'll see those a lot at car shows, or they'll have a collection of them at the Porsche Works. They're fun to look at. There's nothing performance-wise. They were just kind of a looks package. But, you know, every once in a while you'll catch a vision. There's not many of them. They only built a few hundred of each. So if you get to see one, really enjoy it. So that's kind of the quick history. It wasn't a long-lived car. I mean, 69 to 76, not a lot of years. But it was such a unique car. And the mid-engined idea would disappear for decades until it was reborn in what I guess you could call the grandchild of the 914, the Porsche Boxster. And with mid-engine came back, and you had another entry-level Porsche, mid-engine. The higher levels of the Boxster kind of competed with the low levels of the 911. History repeated itself decades later. So I hope that fills you in on the 914. I will fill you in more on the 914 we're working on the 914-6 IMSA car as it progresses, and as we finally get to race it, and as hopefully it gets to Luftgekühlt, which I'm pretty confident it will. But when we race it, I'm looking forward to maybe taking the poor man's Porsche and seeing if we can beat some of the rich man Porsches with the poor man's Porsche. The poor man's Porsche, no longer, by the way, 914-6s, nice ones, are going for 6 figures now because of their rarity. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. You know the drill. We're going to have more coming up very soon for you on the 928s and everything else that's happening in the garage. Thanks for watching.